Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Booklist's Graphic Novels Panel, Part 2, the final installment in our series of special programs in celebration of our third annual Graphic Novels and Libraries Month. I'm Sarah Hunter, Booklist's Books for Youth and Graphic Novels editor. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, please simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Also, Booklist will now be offering closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Last but not least, a link to today's title list was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download it, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the title list by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. Today, we are joined by Priya Huq, creator of Piece by Piece from ABRAMS Children's Books, Kayla Miller, creator of Clash from Etch, an imprint of Clarion Books, Bowen McCurdy, co-creator of SPECTER INSPECTORS from Boom Studios, and BonHyung Jeong, creator of Kyle's Little Sister from JY, an imprint of Young Press. Before we kick off our panel conversation, we'll first hear from each of these amazing creators about their most recent titles. We'll start with Priya. Priya is a Bangladeshi-American cartoonist from Austin, Texas, who enjoys working in water-based media. Her stories deal with complex emotions in both real and fantastic locations. In her free time, she likes to drink tea and look at trees. Huq has contributed to the Nib and other online publications. She lives in New York City with her spouse and 2 cats. Take it away, Priya.
Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Priya Hawk, and I'm the author of Piece by Piece, the story of Nisrin's hijab. Piece by Piece is a story about Nisrin Monirizaman, a 14-year-old girl starting her freshman year of high school in Portland, Oregon in 2002. On her way home from school, towards the end of her 8th grade year, she and her friend Fudize are attacked by a white supremacist. They are both traumatized by the incident, and the book follows how Nisrin copes with what's happened by wearing hijab. I'm asked a lot if this book is autobiographical, and it isn't, but I was also 14 in Portland, Oregon in 2002, and I took inspiration from my family and friends and from some of the things that happened to me back then. Nisrin's family is Bangladeshi, and I wanted to show what life is like for a family like mine. The scenes with her cousins were particularly important to me. I don't want to spoil what happens, but the book follows Nisrin through a year at a new school after choosing to wear the headscarf. Like my family, Nisrin is secular Muslim, and they don't understand why she has chosen to do this, so Nisrin feels really alone for a good part of the book. Later, she learns about her family's victimization in the 1971 Bangladesh genocide, which is hard for any Bangladeshi to learn about, but especially hard for her because of what she's going through. Thankfully, even if her family doesn't understand all her choices, they love her and take good care of her. I wanted Nisrin's story to have a happy ending and for her to ultimately be supported and loved. Thank you. Piece by Piece, the story of Nisrin's hijab is out September 14th.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you also for that adorable photo of your cats. We'll now hear from Kayla Miller. Kayla is the New York Times bestselling author illustrator living and working in New York. They have a BFA in illustration from the University of Arts in Philadelphia. Kayla enjoys watching bad movies, trying to cook new recipes, playing board and video games, and reading other people's graphic novels. Welcome, Kayla. The floor is yours.
Hi. So first slide, please. I'm Kayla Miller, as you've already heard, author and illustrator of the Click series of graphic novels and co-author of the upcoming Besties spin-off series, which will be out, the first book will be out in October. Slide 2, please. 2, next, please. Okay. So the Click series is all about a girl named Olive who is in middle school, and it focuses on her different relationships with her friends and her family. And one thing I really like to push with the books is the importance of communication and also problem solving in a way where there's a good outcome for everyone involved. Slide 3, please. The newest book in the series is Clash. And in this book, there is a cool new girl at Olive's school named Natasha. And she is, you know, fashionable and also considers herself pretty cultured for a 5th grader. And everybody starts to get along with her pretty quickly. And Olive wants to be her friend too. Slide 4, please. So she gets along with everybody else, but for some reason, she just doesn't seem to get Olive. She thinks that Olive's interests are childish and doesn't really get a lot of Olive's sense of humor. Slide 5. She's rude to Olive in these small ways that might seem insignificant as one-off incidents, but the emotions really start to build for Olive, and she starts to feel left out of some of her friendships and like she's being replaced a little bit by Natasha. Slide 6. And the book kind of focuses on when does a dislike for someone become more akin to bullying? And also, how do you deal with a situation where there's someone who you're going to have to see every day and is kind of integrated into your friend groups, but the two of you don't get along? And yeah, that's the newest book.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Next up is Bowen McCurdy. Bowen is a cartoonist and writer from New York City. She graduated with a degree in cartooning from School of Visual Arts in 2018 and has self-published many short comics, as well as illustrated a short story for IDW and Marvel. This is her first graphic novel. Thanks for joining us today, Bowen.
Hi. So Spectre Inspectors is sort of my dream project. I grew up making comics since I was 13, specifically about queer adventures. So this was kind of a dream come true for me. It follows 3 20-somethings and 1 teenager as they attempt to solve the mysteries surrounding the most haunted town in America. That's when one of their team members gets possessed by a demon, and it all goes downhill from there. This story is really a coming of age story, which my co-writer and I found it incredibly important that they all, for the most part, be in their mid-20s. For queer people growing up, coming of age can happen at any point. So this was a particularly important story to me as someone who is still figuring stuff about themselves and wanted stories like this as a child growing up, not knowing terminology or where I fit in the grand scheme of things. So I hope you enjoy this story. It's horror as much as it is romance, and it was just such a blast to work on together. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Bowen. Our final panelist is BonHyung Jeong. Bon studied cartooning at the School of Visual Arts in New York City too, and Kyle's Little Sister is her debut graphic novel, made possible with the help of numerous people. She hopes to make connections with others through relatable stories. Currently living in Korea, where it is 3 a.m., she's always busy playing console games, exactly like someone in her book. Take it away, Bon.
Hi, this is BonHyung. You can call me Bon as your name in English. And Kyle's Little Sister, it's about a girl named Grace goes to middle school with her older brother Kyle, who is very opposite to her. And, you know, because he always been compared to him, and like things can't really get worse, but because they go to the same middle school, things gets worse really. And her old and new friends end up crushing on Kyle. And you know, it kind of makes them fall apart with her old and new friends. And it's basically of the story in genre, the coming of age and slice of life that she tried to figure out with her middle school life together, all together by herself.
Thank you so much, Bon. And big thanks to all of you for all of your insightful presentations. From here, we'll now begin the panel portion of the webinar, and you can all enable your video once more and we'll get started. I will turn on my video too so you can see my face. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So
I am going to start with a really general question. So what is it specifically about comics that makes it the best medium for telling your stories? And Bon, why don't we start with you on this one, just to pick someone at random?
sure. I've always loved writing and I've always loved illustrating, and comics is just such a perfect medium between the two. I had considered doing paneling for movies, but I just love the act of holding the entire story in my hands. So the fact that I can make it a book I can hold is pretty much the most important part to me.
Cool. Kayla, how about you? You were nodding a lot during what Bowen was saying.
Yeah, I've also always loved like visual narratives and have been drawn to things like movies and TV. And I think comics are, unique in the fact that they are a visual medium, but also, a book. And yeah, like one person can make an entire story and, you can hand it to someone on the street. So I've always loved visual storytelling. And I think for my stories in particular, the balance between humor and heartfelt moments is important. And I think that having the visual and being able to see the characters makes for transitions between comedic and humor to the more serious moments easier than maybe like a prose book would be. And I mean, I've always just loved art and I wanted it to be something of like some big part of my life. And I think this is the perfect way to have stories and art.
Cool. Priya, how about you? What is it about comics that works for you so well?
I think that I'm probably the worst person to answer this because I just comics are my entire life, and so I don't really have a good answer other than I just really love comics, and I've never really been able to articulate why. They're just perfect. They're the best. They're the best medium for anything, in my opinion.
I think that's a perfectly good answer. Sometimes they just work into your brain, and that's enough. Bon, how about you? Well, what is it about comics that works so well for you?
I do agree with everyone what Kayla said and Priya said and Bowen said. It's like, I simply like it. I mean, there are probably like tons of like mediums that you can present your stories and everything, but I think the best part is that you are the creation of the stories and the important parts of the characters and everything like that. And I also simply like it. It's just like I just get you. I mean, I don't know how to explain, but I just drawn to comic and like I wanted to make comic. And yeah, it's like I still need as I mentioned in my biography that I still need to get a lot of people's help for sure, but still, yeah, I think it's the fascinating that part that you are charging in the stories and everything.
Interesting. Kayla, you mentioned specifically like humor and feelings, and that's a really good segue into our next question, which is I thought about this specifically with Priya and Bon and Kayla, because your stories deal so much with like big emotions at a young age. I'm curious about how you approach using the visual medium to tell stories that don't deal with a lot of like action or like images or like visual plot, where a lot of the plot is more internal. So Kayla, since you already started to touch on that, I'd like you to start us off here.
Sure. So I think graphic novels can be this amazing tool for, emotional literacy with kids. And, reading a prose book, a lot of the times the character's emotions are kind of handed to you, at least for like the main character. You're going to, be able to hear why they're sad or what they're thinking. But with a graphic novel, you have to draw clues from their body language, their facial expressions, what kind of like setting they're in. And I think that it flexes a different muscle than prose books, and relies really heavily on the art to get that sort of information across. And as somebody who loves making art, I think it's interesting the way that you can act through the characters by kind of figuring out what poses get across the emotion that you're trying to portray.
Interesting. Like, you make a facial expression when you're thinking about drawing it?
Yeah, I think if you've ever been to an art school and you've seen people doing illustration work, everybody kind of makes the face of the character they're drawing. And everybody takes funny reference photos for different poses that they want to do.
That's great. Priya, how about you? How do you approach a plot that is so internal?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I actually got in some trouble with my editor because I was kind of only doing talking heads for a while. And it is hard, or it was hard for me at least to think of. It wasn't hard to think of the creative ways, but it was hard to kind of bust out of that kind of sitcom, like that. I feel like that visual narrative has been so ingrained in my head. So I was really glad that she kept bringing that up, because one of my favorite things about comics is being able to use visual metaphors. So focusing on things in the room, focusing on people's hands or their feet, to show what they're feeling, especially with Piece by Piece, there were a lot of characters that were only saying part of what they meant. And so I tried to use their body language. And what's great about comics is that since the speech bubbles are there, I don't have to focus on their faces, but we still understand that person is speaking. Yeah, and sorry, just also Kayla, bringing up the acting, everything reminded me, like, I wonder how many cartoonists were theater kids in high school.
That's a good question. Yeah, it's so succinct, I think, in comics to have like body language saying one thing and a speech bubble communicating something else. I think that's one thing I really like, the tidy way that it will kind of show that duality in a character. How about you? Your book also deals with this sort of thing. So how do you approach such an internal plot?
Yeah, since actually, like, when I'm working on the comic, I never have officially worked on comic before, so this is really my first time with the colors and everything. And the thing is, facial expression would be part of it for sure, because it's a visual art, and also the colors is the big part. I think is like, so for my book I use a lot of blue colors and red colors, depends on which emotional thing like happening. So blue colors when my characters feels like upset, or well, when they feel uncomfortable, and I use red color for when they feel anger and something like that. And I don't know why, but not, it's like, I do know why, but it's just like unconscious, like from the generation, like in the animation or in the media, that like depends like on which emotional, that with the blue colors, it's bit blue and red, it's just with the color, like depends on emotional, like which emotional that what character feels. So yeah, I think the colors of the backgrounds and the facial expressions is the most part that work with the emotion.
Well, and I know I didn't direct this question to you, but you're like nodding an awful lot, so I feel like you have something to contribute.
I'm just going to agree with everyone. As a comic artist and writer, you're basically the director, the writer, the cinematographer, the actor, all of the above that you would be making like a movie with. So you have to think about how all of these pieces fit together, and because you're controlling all of them, you get to decide how that looks in the end and how they work together. And how they contrast sometimes, if that's what you're going for. So it's a lot of freedom, and it's hard work, but it all adds up so well. Expressions are huge, and in any kind of story, they add so much without saying anything. So yeah, it's a big part of comics in general.
I'm glad you're talking about facial expressions, because I also sort of want to talk about scene setting. And this is something I noticed, particularly with Priya and you, Bowen, is like location seems really important. Bowen, if you wouldn't mind, we could start with you again, just because atmosphere is a word that I think of a lot with your book.
Yeah. So this book is a horror book. It's set in spooky locations. And it's meant to evoke a sort of isolation and atmosphere. Because comics are the way that they are, with horror in movies, you can have jump scares and sound effects and tension from music. All of the timing is a huge factor in what makes it scary. But with comics, you're very limited. So atmosphere, backgrounds in particular, to me are very important to expressing that unease and the emotions you're trying to get across. So I try and treat my backgrounds as if they are a character in themselves, to further isolate the characters and transport the reader.
Priya, I think I directed this question to you as well, just because I really liked seeing all the mountains in your book. I feel like you did a really good job of capturing what it's like to be in the Pacific Northwest in your book. And I think that also might be born a little bit out of my own homesickness from my family who lives out there. But can you talk a little bit about location for you and how that affected your story?
Yeah, well, since it was set in Portland, but it was set there intentionally because the story couldn't have been told anywhere else, since it was based so much on things that have happened to me. So it was important to me to make sure that it was really clear that it was 2002 and that it was Portland. So I did a lot of research on like what clothes were like, and was glad to see that my memory was pretty much correct, but there were also some things that I had forgotten about, which we will all be aware of soon because that fashion is coming back. But I'm glad that you mentioned the mountains, because that drawing the mountains and the trees and the leaves and all the things that I really loved about the Pacific Northwest was kind of my healing thing to get through drawing all these really scary, horrible things that happen. And also, to be honest, drawing buildings. There are a lot of buildings, there are a lot of chairs, and that is not what I draw for fun. So I really leaned hard into the mountains and sky and stuff. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It does, and actually it segues interestingly into a question we got from the audience, if you wouldn't mind me drifting away from my script a little bit here. So this is a question just for Priya. Your book tackles really heavy subjects. How did you get through writing it? And do you have any advice for other creators interested in writing about hard topics? And I thought about that because you just said that writing about mountains or drawing mountains was healing for you.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like I don't want to take up the whole session because I think that I could give like a whole talk about that. But I would say the number one thing is you have to focus on your own mental health above all other things, which is really, really hard, especially when you're on deadline, and especially if, like me, you're falling behind on deadline because you are really aware that you're letting everybody down. But it's just necessary. Writing about subjects like this, and especially drawing subjects like this, especially when it's about you and your family, and to some degree. And I wrote this book because I didn't want to just write. I didn't want to do an autobio book because I knew that would be way too intense. So I was like, oh, it'll be enough to just, I'll write about an imaginary character and things will be slightly better for her than they were for me. But like, it's horrible to draw a hate crime. It's horrible to draw the after effects. It's horrible to research genocide, especially when your family survived it. I saw a lot of things I didn't want to see, but I wasn't there. So anyway, yeah, it's important to set boundaries for yourself, I would say. Being really try to get the planning done, especially on a big project like this, as quickly as possible. If that was one thing I could change, it would be I mean, that's maybe not fair. Writing comics, making comics takes a really long time. And I feel like every project I start, I underestimate how long it's gonna take. So I guess really the answer is just try to be nice to yourself as much as you can as a contrast, and be patient with yourself because it's hard.
Right, because like creating something is hard enough, and creating something that can be a source of pain is even harder.
Yeah,
So.
I don't know why I thought this would be a good idea for my first book.
Thank you for answering that so candidly too, and I hope you don't mind that I just pushed it on you.
No, I think it's a really good question. I'm glad that someone asked it. It is exactly the question I would have asked, I think.
Great. Okay, so Bon, I'm gonna turn the attention to you now, if you don't mind. The influence of manhwa and manga on your work is really clear, but I can also see it in some of the other books that we're presenting today. And I wonder, Bon, if you could speak a little bit about the difference between manhwa and manga and Western comics, and how that affects your personal storytelling.
So I think it's a good thing that I've been through like both culture at some point of my life. So the big part of the difference between Western comics and manga, what I think of when someone asks me like, what do you think of Western comics? I know here we have like a lot of people that are not in specific with Marvel or DC style, but if someone asks me about mention about Western style, then I pop up with Marvel and or DC thing like Euro comics a lot. And that's with the manga and manga, the art styles are the biggest thing that I feel like difference, but not these days for sure. But like as I mentioned before, I mean, the hero comics, because of that, I think the art styles are probably the biggest difference, and it's really growing industry these days. But webcomic at the the format is kind of the part also different that I feel like I think Western and manga are still in the format of papers and the book, and when I see these days with manhwa, it's like webcomic is the big part of the industry right now. Like I don't think people read comic in paper form anyway, like anymore. Like it's more like vertical way. I think people, our younger generation, are probably more used to that. And it's still it's like that's probably the biggest part that I feel like the big differences between two culture. And which one influenced me or like affected me, I think as you said, like manga and manhwa, or because I grew up with animation and stuff like that from Japan, and that's how I think got the inspiration with my art style when I draw something. And with the comic, actually the story with the, especially for Kai's sister and other books that I'm going to produce at some point, I think is the Western comics are probably like, I got a lot of inspiration from Svetlana's Berrybrook Middle School for sure. I read them. I just tell to everyone every interview about her, because I got the idea of how I had to start with the graphic novel for middle school, because I didn't have any idea about that. And yeah, her book gave me so much inspiration, and it's Western comics. It's like, if I have to like categorize or something, some points. And yeah, it's like both culture affected me for making who I am. It's like a big thing right now. But yeah, I think that's the thing right now.
Do any of the rest of you feel influenced by manga in any way? Does that show up in your own work? Bowen, you're nodding. Do you want to chime in
Yeah,
here?
of course. I mean, growing up, I feel like our generation had a big influence from manga. Specifically me, because there weren't a lot of female cartoonists here in the US that had female-centric stories that I could relate to. But, you know, in Japan and overseas, there were so many more options in that front. Like Vaughn was saying with superhero comics, that's what I thought of when I thought of Western comics. So yeah, I totally believe that my style is like a combination of all of the above. It's impossible not to be influenced by it. Webcomics especially have been another big influence, especially in the last 10 years. And they've definitely been influenced by overseas comics. It's a really good thing, I think.
Priya, you were nodding too when I was asking that question. Can you talk a little bit about how manga affects your work?
It's not that it affects my artwork exactly. I mean, it does subconsciously, clearly, but it's just that I was 12 in the year 2000, right when manga was starting to get imported to the States. And I also thought comics was superhero comics. And like, I loved Batman, the animated series, but I never could get into like Batman comics. I think because the boys at school were so mean about it. It's just for boys, but yikes. But when I was 12, a friend of mine in school was like, I've got something you should read, and gave me a copy of Fushigi Yugi Volume 1. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And so my basis, my foundation for what a comic is what was a manga.
Kayla, what about you? Are you at all influenced by manga in your work?
Well, yeah, definitely. I started out making webcomics, and I think that is a world that is definitely really influenced by manga. And I think, you know, I kept some of that visual language where there's like kind of these shorthands for like, you know, what it looks like if someone's nervous or someone's happy, that you know, it's not an expression that a real human face can do, but it is like, you know, like the big sweat drop and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I think it's so useful to have you know, those sort of signifiers that people understand. And I mean, you know, we're getting more and more emoji based in our communication with each other. And I think yeah, so I would say most of the influence comes from that sort of like shorthand with emotional expressions.
Yeah, I noticed that shorthand in your book and in Priya and in Bond's, of course. So I feel a little bit validated. So it's really interesting that we sort of started this conversation about manga as like a distinction from superhero comics being the Western comics. I had a similar experience when I was starting to read comics. Superhero comics are very tough to get into, but it does feel like the only thing that exists in Western comics in a lot of ways, which of course is not true at all. So I'm wondering how those sort of like boxy genre categories have affected you as you have sought to make your own stories and like find a space in the graphic novel arena or comics arena for yourself. Bowen, why don't we start with you on this one?
Okay. Well, I mean, if we're going to superhero comics, I, for a really long time, didn't consider myself as like having the possibility of making comics. I really love superhero comics, and I love MCU and all of, you know, the Justice League animated TV shows. I grew up on those, but they weren't the kind of stories that I wanted to tell myself. So it definitely influenced me in the way that I thought that I couldn't make comics for a very long time. And it was only once I noticed the break of that genre with Anya's Ghost, actually. It's one of my favorite books. I realized that I could tell stories that were not specifically superhero, and that I can combine genres, and I could take influence from all of them for different kinds of books and not set myself in this box that I had put myself into. So a lot of what I do now is try and combine my favorite parts of genre and take influence and break rules and all of the above, and try and tell the most well-rounded stories that I can.
Kayla, you're nodding a lot. Do you want to chime in next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I might be the odd man out when it comes to superhero comics because I was definitely a superhero kid. I loved like Batman and Teen Titans and like the Robin standalone comics where he didn't hang out with Batman. But when it comes to, writing right now, I'm doing realistic fiction. And when it comes to what I read, I tend to go for more like fantasy or sci-fi or horror. Like I love different genres. And one thing I do in the Click books is I like to play around with like dreams and daydreams and fantasy sequences so that Olive can kind of explore her emotions in these more surreal genres that don't necessarily have to play by the same rules as like realistic fiction. And that's, I mean, it's just so fun to draw, like a spooky nightmare or a superhero daydream. So yeah, I love playing with different genres when it comes to the art.
Cool. Priya, how about you?
I don't really think about genre when I'm writing. I think more about form. So because my first answer to your question was going to be like, oh, well, I thought for a long time I needed to make like a gaming couch webcomic. I guess that's a genre. And I was just really stuck on that for a long time. Like it's so funny, like what artists will say is the thing that they thought they had to do is always different. Yeah, but when I'm writing, it's if I think about genre while I'm writing or when I come up with an idea, I get really stuck. So it's more something that I'm thinking about when I'm engaging with other people's work. And then hopefully that sort of intuitively seeps in, and I can subvert expectations or do what's expected depending on what the story is.
Bon, how about you? How do you think about genre when you're making stories?
I think for me, I think it's a really big part for me because, it's because of the story of my genre of Kyle's little sister too. But I have to keep that in mind, what genre I'm working on, because I mean, I would like to make my comic world really chaos, or maybe Prince Charming like pick up the grays out of this mess or something like that. I would love to do that, but at the same time, since my genre is slice of life and coming of age, I have to be like, I want people to be connected with my story, that kind of maybe people can think like, I had similar experience, or I had been in that situation before, or something like that. So I can't like ignore the genre for why I'm working on my book. It gives me the clear directions, like for me to where you should go.
Yeah. So it seems like both approaches can be helpful in their own way. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to return to questions for all of you now. So my goal here is sort of twofold. One, I want to hear your thoughts about different comics and media, and two, this is sort of like a tips for our audience on comics that they should read and seek out in their libraries too. So what was the comic that made you want to make comics yourself? Kayla, let's start with you here. And it doesn't have to be one if you want to say more than one.
So as we kind of touched on, I think that, the graphic novel boom has kind of happened after all of our like childhood and adolescence. So when I was, getting into comics, it was, like the floppy monthly superhero comics and then newspaper comics. And still to this day, like my comfort comics are Peanuts and superheroes. So I think when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be drawing either one of those, like just doing either like a syndicated strip or superhero comics. And I think like some of the Peanuts is still visible in my work. Some of that Snoopy energy.
Priya, how about you? What were the comics that made you want to make your own?
Well, Fushigi Yugi for sure, just really captured my heart. And when I was in high school, we were assigned Persepolis, and we were one of our assignments was to do a comic in a similar style, like something that had happened to us, and that really started my career because that was when I actually got to make something that was guided, and yeah, that was a huge influence on me. I feel bad because I don't think that I don't want to recommend an other than Persepolis. Like Fushigi Yugi is the love of my life, but I don't know if kids would relate to it, and like there's a lot of stuff that's not okay. But
Adults read comics too.
yeah, but it's aimed at kids. And also I don't think adults need to have some of the stuff that's in their lives, but just a warning if you're gonna pick it up. But there was a comic version of The Hobbit, and I always forget the guy's name who did it, and I feel really bad about that, but it's a watercolor comic that came out in like 91, I think. And I had this, I don't know, someone got it for me, this tattered copy of it, and I was obsessed with watercolor when I was little, and I was just like, whoa. Like it's a story, but it's pictures. It blew my mind. So those would probably be the big three.
Cool. Bon, how about you? What were the comics that made you want to make comics?
I mean, there are tons of comics and like great artists out there, but I've been always told my friends and people who knows me that that I can divide my life before I read Ono Natsume's book and after. As Ristorante Paradiso, I kind of get into of her book, and I think I got found her book when I was in middle school, and I was working on preparing to go to one of the art high school at that moment in Korea. And the most part that I didn't get in though, I couldn't get in that school. But the thing is, when I found her book, I got really good the encouragement from her, even though she didn't say anything to me, because that moment, like everyone near to me who wants to go to that high school, their skill was really like great, like precisely, and like the color and everything was like everyone is better than I am. And like I was like, I was kind of like not sure if I can keep going with like cartoon at that point. And when I found her book and I read them, it's like, it gave me some sort of like, encouragement that I can do this, something like that. It's like because her way of storytelling and her art style is like so unique, and I can't really like follow her, but it's like like because that moment I think there was a lot of One Piece where Naruto was out there for me while I'm growing up, and a lot of fantasy for sure. And I wasn't sure that if I can pursue something fantasy, and her story gave me the idea of that you can do this or something like that. Especially like if you ever read Ristorante Paradiso, it's because it feels like something, that kind of story or people feels like exists out there and something like that. And gave me some sort of idea that maybe I can make up with some stories, and maybe I don't have to use the only thin line work, because her work has a lot of like thick line works for sure with her comic. A lot of her comics, I don't know, I think some of her comic changes to thinner these days, but with Restaurante Paradiso and her previous work before Aka, I think she used a lot of thicker line that I feel like. So yeah, it's like basically she is my legend that I can say.
That's great.
Yeah.
Bowen, how about you?
I guess I have two answers for this. Becky Cloonan in general, she was a huge influence on me in high school, because she was like an artist whose style I wanted to emulate and sort of already had going on, just like way advanced. So she was like sort of like a goal to reach. But then I read, as I mentioned, Anya's Ghost by Vera Brosgol, and her book was the sort of story that I wanted to tell, one that was self-contained, perfect arc, character development, but a one-off, one that was like something that you could hold in your hands. You don't need any information from any outside sources. I love long stories, but I don't necessarily want to tell them. I love one-shots above all others. So that was so exciting to me, and it opened up a whole world of possibilities that I hadn't known existed before. So I carried around the book with me for a week after I read it and just like held on to it. I was so excited. So
cool. I really like Vera Brosgol too. Her memoir about summer camp is hysterical.
Yes, be prepared. Yeah.
It's so good. So next I want to know about the biggest influences on your work that aren't books at all. So Mon, why don't we start with you? What's your biggest influence that's not a book?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I was like,
That's okay.
I guess this is like, I think this is my first time to actually call me first. Okay. So for generally, I think people can be like, some people here can be like connected with me. I really love Ghibli movies so much. It's like most part that, I still remember that when I saw the advertisement of House Moving Castle, because it was my one of younger days. I was walking on the street and it was Christmas Eve, and it was showing on the big screen of the advertisement of House Moving Castle is gonna be on the screen, and it just gave me flow of their story and music and the color of the movie. It's just like, blow my mind, and like wanted to make a comic, even though it's animation. I just like, I want to make comics. I mean, it's supposed to be more like, I want to make animation because this is, something, but I wanted to make comic out of it. And yeah, it's like that. And actually, I have another answer for Kyle's little sister, because I watched it, All the Boys I Loved Before on Netflix. It's like, it showed me, it gave me the idea of how children grew up through the middle school to high school. It shows a part of the piece that how characters relationship changes a lot. How the story goes, and the relationship or the chemistry between the two characters and something like that. And it's like, it gave me an influence of like the sense of how middle school was for me, or high school was. And because I forgot that, because it's been a while, but I spent it life before, and like it gave me the nostalgic idea of like, made me go back to middle school and high school. Yeah.
Cool. Priya, how about you? What's your biggest influence that's not a book?
I don't know if I don't know if I can pick a single thing, but oh no, I can. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon just flew into my head. I was gonna also say animation. I saw a bootleg. There was this video store that I'm sure it's still there, Movie Madness in Portland, where they, am I going to get them in trouble? They had bootlegs of Japanese movies in the 90s. And so I watched like a screener of Princess Mononoke with subtitles when I was pretty little, like 9 or something. It must have just come out. And so yeah, that was that. It was a similar thing where I didn't think, oh, I want to go into animation. I thought I want to draw comics. I want to draw. Yeah, and also seeing other people's illustrations make me want to make comics. Just the way storytelling in a single image makes me want to draw comics, and seeing The Green Knight really made me want to draw comics.
That's great. Kayla, you're next.
So when writing the Click books, I've drawn so much inspiration from like the slice of life 90s cartoons, specifically like as told by Ginger, Doug, Pepper Ann, and of course Arthur, Farewell to a King, he's leaving us. But all of those stories that kind of promote, just like being nice to other people and being true to yourself. And I like thinking that I'm carrying on that tradition of like slice of life, nice kids.
I watched Pepper Ann all the time when I was a kid. That's a great rec. I haven't thought about Pepper Ann in such a long time.
Think about her every day.
That's great. Okay, so this is our last question coming up. I want you to imagine that your book is on a library display. What are the books that you want to see on that library display with yours? Bowen, why don't we start with you on this one?
I guess Anya's Ghost would be an honor. Nimona, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, Adventure Zone, Compass South. There's so many. It would just be awesome.
A really big shelf for you then. Kayla, how about you?
I mean, every time I see my book in any sort of grouping, I always feel, oh, it's in such good company. But some books that I think kind of have, different views on the same sort of topics. I think Be Prepared here is getting a lot of love in this panel, but Be Prepared because of like the summer camp. Twins is a good one about school elections. I think Stepping Stones has kind of a, focus on the family, which is important to me. So any of those. And I mean, I'm never mad if I see my books next to Jerry Craft's or Raina's.
Bon, how about you next? What books do you want to see next to yours on a library display?
Actually, like everyone gonna have their own favorite book, but I actually want to say all these 4 people together and chill together. I think it would be awesome, like to see today's like awesome artists at the same shelf. Well, I mean the genre probably some sort of different, but I want to just ask the librarian, can you please put these 4 people together because we've been on the panel before. Yeah, I think it would be awesome if
That's a great answer. And Priya, how about you? What do you want to see on a shelf next to your book?
Anything. But this is my debut book, so I'm just like, it's gonna be it's real. But my friends, I would love to be next to Tide Song by Wendy Xu and Artie and the Wolf Moon by Olivia Stevens and Twins.
These are all great ideas, librarians. Take note. Okay, so that was my last question, and we are just about at time. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. It was truly a pleasure to talk to all of you.
Of course.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing your best answers to my questions. This has been fantastic. Okay, so on Monday, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like the ones you see here. As we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, Graphic Novels and Libraries Month is officially here. And even though July is over, you can still continue to celebrate by watching recordings of all of our webinars, author illustrator panels, and listening to our podcasts. Plus, our Guide to Graphic Novels issue is still free and open to everyone on booklistonline.com. There's some fantastic articles in there about using comics in your library. I highly recommend it, not just because I had a big hand in making it happen. For the complete list of this year's festivities, including links to everything mentioned here, please visit bit.ly/GNJuly2021. If you're not yet a subscriber to Booklist, you can pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. And one more huge thank you to our panelists and our sponsors, ABRAMS Children's Books, Etch, an imprint of Clarion Books, Boom Studios, and JY, an imprint of Yen Press. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.